Good evening. This is Making the Case. I'm Yodit Tewolde. Developing tonight, Republicans here in Texas are following through on Governor Greg Abbott's promise to arrest and corral their colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Yesterday, the Republican House Speaker signed more than 50 arrest warrants for Texas House Democrats who've refused to show up to the Capitol with the intent of blocking the quorum needed to push through a bill packed with voting restrictions. Dozens of Texas Democrats fled the state to D.C. last month, free from the jurisdiction of the Texas Rangers. But tonight, many of those representatives have returned to Texas, and new legal battle lines are being drawn as we speak. BNC's Ariana Maniz is following the new developments tonight.
The Texas Republican-led House is ramping up the pressure on Democrats with arrest warrants to return back to the state capitol in Austin.
Mr. Guerin moves the House adjourned at 10 a.m. tomorrow. His objection, chair hears none, so ordered.
The legislature is in its second special session, and the House remains a few members shy of a full quorum.
They literally just left my Capitol office. My chief of staff told me, hey boss, I want you to know the sergeant at arms just delivered a copy of the arrest warrant. He was looking for you to see if you were here.
The order came hours after the state Supreme Court overturned a lower court's ruling protecting the delegation from arrest as they protest a restrictive voting bill.
They don't care about our votes, they just want our bodies. As long as our bodies are there, they can proceed if they get 100 members.
We've done a couple of things.
Representative Jasmine Crockett says Republicans have shown their true colors, and she feels her Republican colleagues do not see her as equal.
There was a video that came out yesterday. One of the representatives, Representative Cecil Bell, said y'all should just round them up, shackle them up, and throw them in the middle of the chamber, and we'll see some of their eyes bug out. That's not how you speak about someone that is your colleague.
State representatives say the rights of their black and brown constituents are on the line as the bill they're fighting against bans 24/7 voting locations, drive-through polling, and allowing poll watchers, among other things.
This bill would constitute a federal government takeover of elections. It would constitute a massive power grab by Democrats.
And despite the latest attempt by Senate Republicans to block a sweeping voting overhaul bill that counters bills like the one pending in Texas, the delegation says they're still holding on to hope for members of Congress to act.
I believe that on Bloody Sunday, they didn't know where they would land, but they had to keep the hope alive, and that's exactly what I'm doing.
In Washington, I'm Ariana Maniz for Making the Case.
One Texas lawmaker who's still in Washington joins me tonight. Representative Shawn Thierry, a Democrat representing part of the Houston area in the Texas House. Glad to have you on, Representative Thierry. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, we know more than 50 Texas Democrats left the state in mid-July, most heading to Washington. Approximately how many are left there now?
Well, we're in the 20s right now, but we're definitely towing the line. Even those that have to be back, as myself, I have an 8-year-old daughter who's going to be starting 3rd grade soon. We are also very committed to denying the quorum because we understand that we have to use every tool in the toolkit possible to prevent these voter suppression laws from taking us back decades in terms of voting rights in this state.
We're going to get to the specifics of that bill a little later in the show, but I want to get to the colleagues that have returned to Texas. One of them, Representative Jean Wu, avoided arrest for now by challenging the constitutionality of the warrant. And the Harris County District Attorney said that she's expecting to see more challenges filed in the coming days. What's the game plan for you, at least? Are you considering this option?
Yes, we're considering every option at this point. The lines have been drawn in the sand. It's very unfortunate. We never expected that there would be warrants issued for our arrests, particularly those of us that are members of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. We know that we're representing our districts, and to have a warrant issued for our arrests, knowing the history of law enforcement with African Americans in this country, is very concerning. So yes, we're all asking, most of us are willing to use every option available. Writs of habeas corpus will temporarily prevent Texas Rangers, police departments from pulling us over on the side of the road. And as the governor of Texas said, corralling us and taking us back to the House chamber and locking us in the chamber with no ability to move.
Now, we know that some representatives have returned to the floor. Talk to me about the ongoing conversations within the Democratic Party in Texas. Are you concerned that the party is losing unity?
Well, when we left, we were very, very unified. There have been a few members, I believe right now it's only 4, that have returned to the House floor. There were some, I believe 7, that never left with us. So we weren't counting on those members. But we are still, as I said, towing the line. It's very touch and go. Everything changes day by day, hour by hour. But with these writs of habeas corpus, we're hoping that that will send a message to our colleagues that there is nothing to be gained from going back to the House floor. We know what's going to happen when they corral us and bring us back. We are hearing all kinds of hateful rhetoric from our colleagues. There are those that are putting up fake wanted posters on the internet asking bounty hunters and vigilantes to go after us. So we understand that the lines in the sand have been drawn, and it's unfortunate because we know that we're on the right side of history. We know that we're on the side of justice. We know that we don't want partisan poll watchers going in Black and brown communities, bullying them and threatening them. So there's so much that we're fighting for. As the daughter of my grandmother was born in 1917. She did not pass away until 2007. She told me how she had to pay a poll tax. And even then, once she got the right to vote from the 15th Amendment, she wasn't even allowed to stand in line next to white people. So it's not just political for many of us, it's personal.
Now, we know that the Sergeant at Arms has come looking for some representatives in their offices. You're no stranger to that. What's it like watching this happen and seeing your name on an arrest warrant, especially given the fact that you're an attorney?
Yes, absolutely. That was very shocking to me. Fortunately, when that video was filmed and they came looking for me, I was on a flight headed to Washington, D.C. I wasn't able, as I said, I'm the mom of an 8-year-old daughter, and so I wasn't able to initially fly out on the first day with my colleagues. So I was very fortunate that I was not there that day, or I would have been locked in the chamber. It's called putting a call on the house. And what that means is you have to get a permission slip to even be able to leave, to even to go to your hotel room. You are essentially locked in the chamber. And so it is very disappointing. I've never been arrested in my life. And so, but I will say this, when you look at what our ancestors went through, our forefathers, you look at the Montgomery bus boycott, how they were willing to fight for over 380 days. So many were arrested. So we feel we're in good company.
Absolutely. Well, we're coming up on a break, Representative, but when we come back, I want to talk about this bill you're fighting against and how your family is inspiring that fight. Stay tuned for more with Representative Thierry on Making the Case. We're continuing our conversation about the fight for voting rights in Texas and the month-long show of solidarity from Texas Democrats who stayed away from the Capitol to block Quorum. Still with me is Representative Shawn Thierry, who's still in Washington, D.C. Okay, let's talk about this Texas bill that you and your colleagues are fighting so hard to keep from passing. What specifically is in it that undermines voting rights?
Well, I wish you had more time tonight, but I'll start with the most poisonous pills of the bill. First of all, we know that many elderly in our community vote by mail. The mail ballot has been something that we've seen in our communities for so long. Because of the high record turnout in my county, where I live, Harris County, which is a very, very racially diverse county, and that went Democrat, they are now taking away mailing those ballots to elderly people. They will now have to possibly go online, figure out how to ask for the mail ballot. They will have to put their driver's license number on it. They will have to put the last 4 digits of their social security number on it. And if their signature does not match exactly the way it did years earlier when they registered to vote on their voter registration card, they can be subject to criminal prosecution. We also had 24-hour voting and for shift workers in Harris County and some of the other more populous counties. They're taking away that option. They know that hourly wage workers and people who are earning even minimum wage took advantage of that because they had to sometimes compromise giving up their paycheck to go exercise their right to vote. They're taking that away. They took away mobile voting for the disabled community. They empowered Republican partisan poll watchers to allow people like the Proud Boys, the insurrectionists that we saw taking over our nation's capital. They can now come in my community and interrupt people when they're voting and harass them. And they have more power now than the actual election judge sitting in the precinct. It is horrible.
Well, what would trump that bill would be federal voting rights legislation, which Congress still hasn't passed, which is why so many have demonstrated urging lawmakers to act quickly. How have you been spending your time in D.C. to further that cause?
Yes, we hit the ground running. I've had meetings with so many members of Congress. Senator Warnock, who we thank him for his leadership. He had a meeting with Speaker Pelosi, with the President of the United States, urging them to put this issue on the front burner. So that was very helpful. We met with numerous senators. We met with Senator Manchin. We met with Congresswoman Maxine Waters. I spoke 2 days ago with Congresswoman AOC. I mean, we've been meeting with everyone on both sides of the aisle, letting them know that time is not on our side. We need federal interaction to preempt these bills in Texas. Now, the good news is the House is taking up the John Lewis Voting Rights Act within the next 2 weeks. However, the clock is ticking for us in Texas with these arrest warrants. So we are literally in the fourth quarter. Time is running out, and we are hoping that the federal government, that Congress and Senate will act to pass legislation which would cancel not only this bad bill in Texas, but as people have heard, as Texas goes, so goes the nation. So there's a possibility that this would spread nationwide.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about safety, given the fact that, yes, the clock is ticking, especially with all of the controversy surrounding, this effort. We've heard from other representatives who've been concerned about coming home and also about their safety outside of the state. Has this been an issue for you?
Well, as you know, it was an issue the very first day I flew out. I caught multiple planes when I heard that they had come to my office, and I was very concerned about being on the ground in Texas. And now it remains an issue for me. I can only imagine, I'm a single working mom, and I don't know what I would do if they came and told me they were going to corral me or detain me and capture me and take me back to the House Capitol. What would I do with my child standing right there? My daughter was traumatized by that. She saw some of the news footage. I have an 80-year-old mom, and, I'm the primary caregiver for her as well. But I will tell you this, my mom is my inspiration. She was the first Black woman to integrate one of the junior high schools in Texas, in Houston. She marched with Barbara Jordan. She sat in at the lunch counters when Black students, college students, weren't even allowed to sit at the lunch counter. She had milkshakes poured on her head and thrown in her face. And she told me, Shawn, keep fighting. It's okay. We're going to be okay. And so they're my inspiration. So if my mom could go through that and my grandmother could go through that, I feel like it's the least I can do to make sure that my daughter is not going to be the fourth generation of Black women that will have her right to vote impeded. And so I'm here for the long haul, and I'll do everything I can as long as it takes to protect the precious right to vote, particularly for those of us in Black communities.
You've had to sacrifice, spending time with your loved ones. How has it been for your daughter and your mother to be without you? It's
hard. It's lonely. got a picture of my daughter one day, and she was dressed with a scarf on her head and sunglasses and a T-shirt. My mom texted to me, and I thought she was just being silly. And then my mom told me that my daughter was sad that she hadn't seen me, and she wanted to fly on the plane, but she was afraid of being arrested. And so she was actually in a disguise on that photo. And so I realized then the impact that this was having on her. So that is when I used, my own personal funds, and I paid for a ticket for my mom and my daughter to fly up. And so they were able to spend a few days with me. They had to get back. My mom had things she had to take care of in her home. So it's not easy. But again, I always say, my plight and my journey is nothing compared to what many others are going through. And so I'm here for them. I'm here for people that work throughout the night and want to be able to go vote and not have to choose between earning their paycheck or being docked of their pay to exercise their constitutional right. I'm here for the senior citizens in my district that are going to be expecting a mail ballot and don't know what happened to it. I cannot have them be disenfranchised. There is so much on the line here. So, it's sad. It's sad for me and my family, but I'm grateful that, my daughter understands and she wants to fight with me.
Well, you've got a lot of support, especially after the governor renewed his calls for Democrats to get back to work several times this week. Let's take a listen to what Sylvester Turner, the mayor of Houston, had to say.
I give a big shout out and a thank you for those legislators who left their families, left their friends, left their jobs, and stood up to enable all of Texans to have access to the voting booth. So I want to thank them. And the fight continues, not only in the state of Texas, but across the United States. It is my hope, again, that the people in Congress will understand what is taking place here and in other states. It's one thing to have the right to vote in the U.S. Senate, but it's another thing to be denied the right to vote in cities and counties throughout the state of Texas and in other states. And it's like a repeat of what took place years ago, and now we're fighting this battle in 2021.
And that was the mayor on BNC today. So your sacrifice, Representative, hasn't necessarily... Yes, absolutely. But your sacrifice hasn't gone in vain because clearly your work is having an impact. Do you agree with the mayor? Is this bigger than just Texas?
Absolutely. And that's the point we've been making all along. What started off in Texas has moved the needle across the nation. We know that if these bills are successful and if we do not have federal legislation that would preempt these types of voter suppression bills, we're going to see these all around the country. This is all based on the big lie. Let's just be clear. Donald Trump lost the election fair and square, and he lost badly, and he couldn't accept that. And so he had to allege that there was fraud all around the country to make up for him being a loser in this case. And so he issued an edict to all of the GOP across the country, and he asked exactly for these types of bills to be passed. And so this is what we're fighting against. My mayor, Sylvester Turner, is exactly right. He's a former member of the Texas legislature. He knows what's at stake. We have got to have our federal government step in. This cannot happen across our nation. We are depriving people of the most precious right. Their voice is their vote. And so, for example, in Texas, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have said, well, we're not making it harder to vote, we're making it harder to cheat. But in reality, it's the opposite. They are cheating, and they're making it easier to cheat and harder to vote. There was no evidence of widespread voter fraud in Texas, and we haven't seen any across the country. Yet now we are limiting hours to vote. We're making it more difficult for elderly people in lower income communities that don't have transportation to vote. Why? Why are they doing this? And they cannot justify it. The evidence does not support their allegations. So this is nothing more than the big lie from Donald Trump, and it's got to stop. right here and right now. And we're putting it all on the line.
You absolutely are. Well, we're proud of you. We're supporting you, and we thank you for your time tonight. Representative Shawn Thierry, thank you for joining us again.